Welcome to Spicy Family Scandals, where real-life drama meets hard-earned wisdom. Today's story is about betrayal, resilience, and the power of standing up for yourself. Let's dive in.
I never thought I'd hear my husband say the words, "Just do it. She'll never see it coming." It was late, past midnight, and the house was eerily quiet except for the low murmur of voices coming from the living room. I had woken up thirsty and gone to the kitchen for a glass of water. That's when I heard him. Ryan, my husband of 12 years. His voice was sharper, colder than I'd ever heard it. I froze mid-step, the glass in my hand forgotten, and strained to make out the conversation. "She's too naive," Ryan continued. "She actually thinks she can hold on to all of it. Margaret, we deserve that money just as much as she does. You know that." Margaret. Of course, she was involved. My mother-in-law had always been intrusive, but lately, she'd taken things to a new level. Ever since my mother passed away 3 months ago and left me the $20 million inheritance, Margaret had been circling like a vulture. She wasn't even subtle about it. Constant remarks about how money should be shared in a marriage and how Ryan's sacrifices for our family warranted a significant say in how the inheritance was handled. I'd brushed it off, thinking it was just her usual overbearing attitude. But now, listening to them talk, I realized I'd been blind. "We just need to push her a little harder," Margaret said, her voice as venomous as ever. "She's weak, Ryan. All that grief over her mother has made her stupid. If she doesn't hand over control willingly, well, she let the sentence hang, but the implication was chilling." I backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The glass slipped from my fingers and shattered on the floor, the sound like a gunshot in the silence. "What was that?" Ryan snapped. Panic surged through me. I couldn't let them know I'd overheard. "Sorry," I called out, forcing my voice to stay steady. "I dropped a glass. I'll clean it up." Ryan appeared in the doorway, his eyes narrowing as he studied me. "What are you doing up?" "Couldn't sleep," I lied, hoping the dim light would hide the terror on my face. "Just needed some water." He didn't say anything, but the way he looked at me made my skin crawl. For the first time in our marriage, I felt like I didn't recognize him. When he finally turned and walked away, I sank to the floor, shaking. I didn't know what they were planning, but one thing was clear. I wasn't safe. That night, I locked the bedroom door and lay awake, replaying their conversation in my head. What did they mean by "she'll never see it coming"? How far were they willing to go? My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. I couldn't confront them. Not yet. I needed proof, and more importantly, I needed a plan. If Ryan and Margaret thought they could outsmart me, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The next morning, I acted as if nothing had happened. My hands trembled as I poured Ryan his coffee, but I kept my face neutral. He didn't seem to notice. If anything, he was more cheerful than usual, like a man who had already won. "Busy day today?" he asked, his tone casual, almost too casual. I forced a smile. "Just some errands." "Why?" He shrugged. "Just asking. You've seemed a little stressed lately." His words stung with irony. Stress didn't even begin to cover it. I was terrified, but I wasn't going to let him see that. After Ryan left for work, I grabbed my laptop and started digging. My mother's estate had been officially transferred into my name just weeks earlier, and I realized I didn't know nearly enough about how vulnerable it might be. Could Ryan gain access somehow? Could he or Margaret challenge the inheritance in court? I spent hours reading legal articles, and the deeper I dove, the clearer it became. They couldn't take it legally. So, why did it feel like they were planning something darker? By afternoon, I was ready to collapse from the weight of it all. That's when Lisa, my best friend since college, showed up unannounced. Lisa was the kind of person who always seemed to know when you needed her most. Her timing was uncanny. "You look like hell," she said as she stepped inside, dropping her purse on the counter. "What's going on?" I hesitated. Telling someone felt dangerous, but keeping it all inside felt even worse. Finally, I took a deep breath and told her everything: the overheard conversation, the inheritance, Ryan and Margaret's escalating behavior. Lisa's face hardened with every word. "This isn't normal," she said when I finished. "You know that, right?" You're not safe. I don't know what to do, I admitted, my voice cracking. You need evidence, Lisa said firmly. If they're planning something, you have to be able to prove it. Her words were like a lifeline. I realized she was right. I couldn't just sit around waiting for the worst to happen. I needed to get ahead of them. That night, after Ryan went to bed, I stayed up, searching for answers. By 3 a.m., I had ordered a set of small security cameras that could be discreetly placed around the house. They'd arrive in 2 days. But in the meantime, I had to play my part. The next evening, Margaret showed up uninvited, as usual. She brought over a casserole, one of her many attempts to act like the doting mother-in-law. But the moment Ryan left the room, her mask slipped. You know, she said, leaning against the counter. Ryan's been under a lot of stress lately. He's worried about you. Worried about me? I asked, playing dumb. Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. Well, with all this money hanging over your head, it's a big responsibility. Sometimes people don't think clearly when they're grieving. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. I'm managing just fine, Margaret. Her smile widened, but it was cold. Of course, dear. But if you ever need help, don't hesitate to ask. Her words sent a chill down my spine. She wasn't offering help. She was issuing a warning. That night, as I lay in bed next to Ryan, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Margaret was right about one thing. I wasn't thinking clearly. But that was about to change. If they wanted to play games, I was ready. They had no idea who they were dealing with. 2 days later, the security cameras arrived. I barely waited for the delivery truck to pull out of the driveway before tearing the box open. The cameras were sleek, small, and easy to hide, exactly what I needed. Lisa came over that evening to help me set them up. You're sure they won't notice? She asked as she carefully mounted one behind the bookshelf in the living room. Ryan doesn't pay attention to details, and Margaret's too busy pretending to be a saint to notice anything out of place, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. By the time we were done, I had cameras in every critical spot: the kitchen, the living room, the hallway leading to the bedrooms. My office, where I kept all the documents related to the inheritance, was practically Fort Knox now. That night, I reviewed the camera feed obsessively, making sure everything was working. It felt surreal, watching my house through the lens of a silent observer. It also felt like the first step toward taking control of my life again. But the first sign that something was seriously wrong came faster than I expected. The next afternoon, I returned home from the grocery store to find Margaret standing in my office. My office. She was rifling through my desk drawers like she had every right to be there. What are you doing? I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. Margaret didn't even flinch. She straightened up, holding a stack of papers in her hand. Oh, I was just looking for a pen, she said smoothly, but her smile didn't match her words. What's all this? That's none of your business, I snapped, snatching the papers from her. My hands were shaking, but I didn't care if she noticed. Margaret raised an eyebrow, her smile widening. No need to be so touchy, dear. I'm just trying to help. After all, managing this kind of money can be overwhelming. You wouldn't want to make a mistake. Get out, I said, my voice low and dangerous. For a moment, she just stared at me, as though weighing her options. Then she turned and walked out, but not before tossing a casual, "You should really think about Ryan. This inheritance could be the start of something big for both of you." As soon as she was gone, I locked the door and collapsed into my chair. My heart was pounding. Margaret wasn't just overstepping anymore. She was digging for something. Proof of control? Weakness? I didn't know. But I was certain of one thing. She wasn't acting alone. That night, I reviewed the footage from the cameras. Sure enough, there she was, sneaking into my office while Ryan distracted me with a pointless phone call about picking up takeout. They were coordinating. The next morning, I confronted Ryan. "Why was your mother in my office yesterday?" I asked, keeping my tone as neutral as I could manage. Ryan didn't even blink. "She mentioned she was looking for a pen." "Why?" "She was going through my desk," I said. Ryan laughed, but it was forced. "Come on, you know how she is. She probably got nosy, but she didn't mean anything by it." "Ryan," I said, stepping closer to him, "don't lie to me. What's going on?" His face hardened, and for a second, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt. But then he shook his head. You're being paranoid. It's the stress getting to you. It was the way he said it, so dismissive, so condescending, that made my blood boil. But instead of arguing, I just nodded and walked away. Let him think he'd won. Let them both think I was too fragile, too paranoid to see what was happening. Because now, I wasn't just gathering evidence. I was waiting for them to slip up. And something told me it wouldn't be long. The breaking point came faster than I expected. It was a quiet evening, too quiet. Ryan and Margaret were in the living room, whispering intensely while I pretended to scroll on my phone in the dining area. I had headphones in, but no music was playing. Every word they said was a clue, a piece of the puzzle I was frantically trying to solve. She's dragging this out, Margaret hissed. I'm telling you, Ryan, the longer we wait, the harder it'll be. She's not stupid. Ryan's reply was sharp, low. And what do you suggest? I can't just... He stopped himself, glancing in my direction. I pretended not to notice, tapping my phone screen like I couldn't care less. Inside, my pulse was racing. What couldn't he just do? What were they so afraid of? Later that night, I reviewed the camera footage in my bedroom with the door locked. Their conversation had been recorded perfectly, every word crystal clear. Margaret leaned in closer to Ryan. She's too attached to that money. She'll never let it go unless we force her hand. And how do you plan to do that, Mom? Ryan said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. She's already suspicious. Margaret's reply chilled me to my core. We make her scared, Ryan. Just enough to push her over the edge. Once she's out of the picture, everything will fall into place. I slammed my laptop shut, my breath hitching. Out of the picture? Were they really talking about killing me? My head spun as I tried to make sense of what I'd just heard. Was this a bluff? A sick, manipulative tactic to scare me into compliance? Or were they serious? I didn't have time to dwell on it. The next morning, I made a decision. I had to involve the police. But not yet. Not until I had something irrefutable. Lisa was the first person I called. They're escalating, I told her, pacing in the safety of her apartment. I have footage of them talking about getting rid of me. Lisa's face paled. Oh my God. You need to go to the police. I will, I said, holding up a hand. But not yet. I need them to incriminate themselves further. Right now, it's just words. If they act on it, even a little, I'll have everything I need. Lisa grabbed my arm. And what if they don't wait? What if they try something before you can stop them? I'll be ready, I said, trying to convince myself as much as her. That evening, I returned home like nothing had happened. Ryan greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, his charm in full force. How was your day? He asked, as if he hadn't been plotting my demise less than 24 hours ago. Fine, I said, forcing a smile. Yours? Busy, he replied, heading to the kitchen. Mom's coming over for dinner tomorrow, by the way. Perfect. Another chance to catch them in the act. The following day, I set up an additional camera in the dining room, where Margaret always insisted we eat. I made sure every angle was covered, every word could be captured. Dinner was tense. Margaret's cheerful facade barely masked her growing impatience, and Ryan's forced small talk grated on my nerves. Halfway through the meal, Margaret put down her fork and said, You know, darling, it's a shame you're holding on to that inheritance so tightly. Ryan and I were talking earlier, and we both agreed it's just unhealthy. My hands clenched under the table, but I kept my tone light. Unhealthy? How so? Margaret gave a sympathetic smile that made my skin crawl. Well, grief can cloud judgment. And let's face it, managing that kind of money isn't easy. You'd be better off letting Ryan take care of it. He's so good with numbers. Ryan's good at a lot of things, I said, my voice sweet but loaded with meaning. But I think I'll manage just fine. The tension was palpable, and I could see Ryan's jaw tighten. Margaret opened her mouth to say something, but Ryan cut her off. Let's not push, he said, his tone warning. She'll come around when she's ready. Margaret gave me one last long look before changing the subject, but I wasn't fooled. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. That night, I reviewed the footage. Every manipulative word, every veiled threat, it was all there. They were growing desperate, and desperate people made mistakes. I just needed to stay one step ahead. The breaking point came that Friday night. I had spent the entire day on edge, a gut feeling warning me that something was coming. Ryan had been unusually quiet all week, and Margaret had canceled one of her frequent visits, claiming she needed to rest. It felt like the calm before a storm. At around 10 p.m., I was in my office going over paperwork when I heard the front door open and slam shut. Footsteps followed, heavy, deliberate. Ryan. But he wasn't alone. Margaret's voice cut through the quiet like a knife. "Tonight, Ryan. This has gone on long enough." I froze, my pen slipping from my fingers. They were louder than usual, reckless. Whatever they were planning, they didn't care if I overheard. I switched the camera feed on my laptop and watched as they entered the living room. Ryan was pacing, his fists clenched, while Margaret sat on the couch, her expression steely. "She's not going to listen," Margaret said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You saw how she acted at dinner. She thinks she's untouchable. That money has made her arrogant." Ryan stopped pacing and turned to her. "And you think this is the solution? Do you even realize what you're asking me to do?" Margaret leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Do you think she'll let you have any of it? She's already made her choice. It's her or us, Ryan. If you don't have the spine to handle this, I will." My blood ran cold. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't manipulation or bluffing anymore. They were past words, past empty threats. This was real. And then Ryan said something that made my stomach twist into knots.
"Fine.
But it's on you if this goes sideways." Margaret stood and placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Don't worry, dear. She won't even see it coming." I knew I had to act, but my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely pick up my phone. I texted Lisa first. "They're planning something. Tonight. Call the police.
Now."
Her reply came within seconds. "On it. Stay safe." I didn't wait to hear sirens. I grabbed the small handgun my mother had left me, something I never thought I'd need, and locked my office door. The walls felt like they were closing in as I waited, heart pounding, every sound amplified in the silence. Then came the knock. "Babe." Ryan's voice was soft, coaxing. "Are you still awake?" I didn't answer. The knock came again, harder this time. "Open the door. We need to talk." I held my breath, the gun trembling in my hands. When the door didn't open, I heard Margaret's voice, low and furious. "She's stalling. Do it now." The sound of wood splintering made me jump. They were breaking in. My instincts kicked in, and I backed toward the window, my phone in my other hand. I dialed Lisa, whispering, "Where are the cops?" "They're on their way," she said, her voice tight with panic. "Stay hidden." The door burst open, and Ryan stepped in, his face dark with determination. Behind him, Margaret followed, clutching something in her hand, a kitchen knife. Ryan raised a hand, as if to calm me, but his eyes betrayed him. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," he said. Margaret sneered. "You're too stubborn for your own good. But it's over, dear." I lifted the gun, my hands shaking. "Stay back," I warned, my voice cracking. Ryan hesitated, but Margaret took a step forward. "You wouldn't dare," she taunted. Before I could respond, the wail of sirens pierced the night. The flashing red and blue lights spilled through the window, and the tension in the room broke like a snapped wire. Margaret's face twisted in rage. "You called the cops?" Ryan turned on her, furious. "I told you this was a stupid idea." The next moments were a blur. The police stormed in, shouting commands. Ryan dropped to his knees, his hands in the air, while Margaret screamed, trying to explain herself. I lowered the gun, tears streaming down my face. The officers gently took it from me as one of them said, "You're safe now." But was I? My home, my marriage, my life, it all felt shattered beyond repair. As they led Ryan and Margaret away in handcuffs, I realized that this was just the beginning. Now it was my turn to fight back. The aftermath was chaos. Ryan and Margaret were taken into custody, but the house felt haunted by their presence. The splintered office door stood as a glaring reminder of how close I'd come to losing everything. For hours after the police left, I sat in the living room with Lisa, my hands trembling as I replayed the night's events in my mind. They didn't even hesitate, I said, my voice hollow. They were ready to kill me, Lisa. Over money. Lisa squeezed my hand. But they didn't succeed. You're still here. You outsmarted them. Her words felt hollow. I wasn't sure if I felt smart, lucky, or just broken. The police had taken all the footage from the cameras as evidence. Watching those recordings again had been agonizing, but it was necessary. Not just for the case, but for me to understand the depth of their betrayal. Every whispered plan, every cold-blooded decision, it was all there, clear as day. The most damning piece of evidence wasn't just their words, though. It was the fact that Ryan had brought a gun with him that night. When the officers searched the house, they found it tucked in the back of his car. Loaded. Ready. The next morning, Detective Carter, the officer leading the investigation, called me. We're moving forward with charges of attempted murder and conspiracy, he said. The footage makes it an airtight case. They'll be behind bars for a long time. Hearing those words should have brought relief, but instead, I felt a strange emptiness. What happens now? I asked. Now, we ensure they don't have the chance to hurt you again, he said. You'll likely need to testify, but with what we have, there's no way they'll walk free. Testify. The thought made my stomach churn. Facing Ryan and Margaret in court felt like an insurmountable task. But what choice did I have? They had tried to destroy me, and they needed to be held accountable. The media got wind of the story within days. Millionaire heiress survives murder plot became a headline plastered across local news outlets. Reporters camped outside my house, their cameras flashing every time I stepped outside. The invasion of privacy was suffocating, but it also brought a strange sense of vindication. The world was finally seeing Ryan and Margaret for who they truly were. A week later, the trial began. Sitting in the courtroom, I felt like I was watching a twisted version of my life play out. Ryan and Margaret sat at the defense table, their expressions carefully neutral. They avoided looking at me, but I could feel the weight of their presence like a physical force. The prosecution wasted no time playing the recordings for the jury. Every word, every veiled threat echoed through the courtroom, sending chills down my spine. When Ryan took the stand, he tried to play the victim. I didn't know what Margaret was planning, he said, his voice trembling. I was scared, too. I never wanted to hurt her. I clenched my fists, my anger boiling beneath the surface. He was lying. The recordings showed him agreeing, participating, enabling. Margaret, on the other hand, didn't bother with tears. It was all a misunderstanding, she said coldly. I was trying to protect my son. She's been unstable since her mother died. We were concerned about her mental health. The audacity of her words made me want to scream. Protecting Ryan? Concerned about my mental health? They had been ready to leave me for dead. When it was my turn to testify, I felt the weight of every eye in the room. The courtroom fell silent as I recounted the months of manipulation, the overheard conversations, the night they broke down my door. They didn't care about me, I said, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. They only cared about the money, and when I refused to give it to them, they decided I was expendable. By the time I stepped down, the tension in the room was palpable. The verdict came faster than I expected. Guilty. On all counts. Attempted murder, conspiracy, and unlawful possession of a firearm. Ryan looked stunned, as if he had genuinely believed his lies would save him. Margaret's face was a mask of fury, her carefully crafted persona shattered in front of everyone. As they were led away in handcuffs, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and a lingering sense of betrayal. I had loved Ryan once. I had trusted him. And now, he was gone, along with the life I thought we'd built together. But I was still standing. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. After the trial, I thought closure would come easily. The guilty verdict had been clear, the evidence damning. Ryan and Margaret were gone, out of my life, and into the prison system where they belonged. But healing doesn't happen in a courtroom. The house was silent in a way I wasn't used to. For weeks, I caught myself expecting Ryan to walk through the door, that practiced smile on his face, as if none of it had ever happened. I expected Margaret's voice on the answering machine, another one of her thinly veiled insults disguised as advice. Instead, there was only quiet. And with the quiet came reflection. Lisa had been my rock throughout everything, but even she couldn't answer the questions swirling in my mind. How had I missed the warning signs? How had I let myself love someone capable of such cruelty? One evening, I found myself going through old photo albums. There was Ryan, smiling at our wedding, holding my hand during a trip to Napa, grinning next to me at my mother's birthday party. I realized then that I hadn't fallen in love with a monster. I had fallen in love with the man he pretended to be. And that realization broke something open inside me. For too long, I had blamed myself for trusting him, for letting Margaret chip away at my confidence. But the truth was, their actions weren't about me. Their greed, their entitlement, their willingness to destroy, they had nothing to do with who I was and everything to do with who they were. That realization was liberating. I decided to sell the house. It held too many memories, too much pain. With part of the inheritance, I bought a smaller, cozier home on the outskirts of town. It wasn't as grand, but it was mine. Truly mine. I also started volunteering at a local shelter for victims of domestic violence. Listening to the stories of other women, I realized how many of us are told, directly or indirectly, to ignore red flags, to keep the peace, to doubt our own instincts. It became my mission to change that. Through it all, one lesson stood out above the rest. No amount of love, loyalty, or history can excuse someone who treats you like a possession rather than a person. One day, as I sat in the garden of my new home, Lisa stopped by. "You look different," she said, handing me a cup of coffee. "Different how?" I asked, curious. "Lighter," she said with a smile. "Like you finally let go." I thought about her words, about everything I'd endured, and realized she was right. Letting go wasn't just about Ryan or Margaret. It was about the guilt, the shame, the what-ifs. It was about reclaiming myself. To anyone reading this, I want to say, trust your instincts. They're louder than you think, and they'll never steer you wrong. Life doesn't come with guarantees, but it does come with choices. And choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. Ryan and Margaret thought they could break me, but they only showed me how strong I really am. And for that, strangely, I'm grateful. The storm is over now, and while the scars remain, they're a reminder of the woman I've become, stronger, wiser, and unshakably free.